I watched a film the other day. Many of us know about the plight and principles of the women that I'm about to mention. The film both shocked me, saddened me, but also made me proud. The film was The Suffragettes. This was a time in history that many of us know about. What the women of this group tried to do, if you don't know, I'll tell you. In 1903, the Women's Social and Political Union was founded by Emmeline Pankhurst. And what they wanted was the right to vote. The group, better known as the Suffragettes, was a creation on the back of the initial protest for voting by Millicent Fawcett. But her peaceful protest fell on deaf ears and nobody would simply listen. The Suffragettes were also peaceful initially in the early years. It wasn't until the daughters of Mrs. Pankhurst attended a meeting in Manchester and asked both Winston Churchill and Sir Edward Grey if women should have a vote, neither politician answered. They were arrested for shouting and demanding an answer. Back then, this was unheard of. People usually sat quietly and listening whether they agreed or not. It's almost like saying we run the country and you do as you're told, which is something I have said many times before in previous episodes. They were arrested for causing an obstruction and they refused to pay the fine, so they went to prison. And they went to prison because they believed in what they stood for. They believed they had a right, and they did. Those of us that watch the film or even just simply know the history, they went on hunger strike. It got to the point when the prisons wouldn't force feed them anymore, but let them get weak, release them from prison, and if they died outside of prison, it wouldn't be an embarrassment to the establishment. Now, obviously, many of them would get better, but then the authorities would rearrest them for the most trivial and smallest of offences. The women were ridiculed, treated as outcasts, and on record they were physically attacked by authorities for merely trying to have equal rights and make their voice heard. In the film, the fictional character Maud was cast out by her own husband, and he banned her from seeing her own son, eventually giving him up for adoption. Women back then had no rights at all. Her husband was more worried about what people would think about what his wife was doing than for the care of his child and her child being with his mum. The win for the right to vote not only changed this country, it changed the world. Many countries afterwards started to allow women to have more rights, more equal rights. What you've got to be asking is, during this time, the men, the husbands, went off to war, and it was the women who ran things, took over the men's jobs. So if they was good enough to do that, why wasn't they good enough to have the vote for women? But when the men came back, it went back to the way it was. These women, brave women, tried to go against the establishment. They tried to go against the grain, against rules and legislations that were in place for years. Linear thinking mindset that was ingrained in the minds of the politicians. Even the royal family, they were ridiculed because they wanted to change things for the better, and other people were benefiting from the fact of how it was. They wanted something from the government. The government were more than capable of giving it to them, but it goes back to being able to control a group of people, for the men to control the women. And that's what's happening now. Jeremy Corbyn, left-wing radical you might say, but he wants to give something back to the people, back to us, back to me, back to you. He is going against the grain. He is going against a way of thinking that's been going on for years. People making untold amounts of money from our backs. Yes, companies should make a profit. I make a profit in my job, but over a sustained period, and that keeps prices down for my customers, rather than making hard, cold profits in a short space of time at the highest rate I possibly can, and that makes things expensive. Why shouldn't we have a railway nationalised? Why shouldn't we have an NHS system that is second to none, that is fully financed and not struggling? These things people are making money from, and this may well stop if Jeremy Corbyn gets what he wants. Now, I don't need to go on about everything he's trying to do because it has been endlessly talked about over the past few months. We all know. But he has a following. People have faith in this guy, hope in this man, like the suffragettes did in Mrs. Pankhurst. I've explained what has happened to her supporters, what's happening to Jeremy Corbyn supporters, Corbynites if you will, being labelled thick as pig shit, not being able to vote in the leadership just because we joined after a certain time. There's a social media purge going on. His own cabinet turned against him. Owen Smith mentioned the word lunatic. There's a pattern forming, as there was back then with the women I mentioned. Now, they can't use violence as they did way back because there's laws in place to protect us from that. But what does a bully do when he thinks his victim is about to retaliate? They increase the fear, increase the abuse. I was bullied when I was at school. The suffragettes stood by their beliefs no matter what. They proved, they set the benchmark for what could be done through faith and unity. Jeremy Corbyn is being ridiculed in the hope to separate us, and through separation comes weakness. You take a few bricks out of a wall, eventually there's a good chance that it's going to fall down. The Corbynites have hope, have faith. When that happens, the veil in front of our eyes starts to slip, and then we start to notice things about what's actually going on. And the people in the point of control start to lose their grip. The men, the politicians, started to lose their grip on the women, the suffragettes. To get this back, they started to take things away. They were ridiculed. The film depicted that even some of the female neighbours of the women were against them, who in fact, they were the very ones they were fighting for. Now, it takes on average 7 weeks for something to be repeated and planted in the subconscious, which then forms an ingrained belief. It takes even longer to break it. And we have been controlled and deprived of what we deserve for years. Corbyn is trying to give that back, trying to break that habit. The suffragettes did it. We can do it. If we don't break that cycle now, what hope is there for our children? Once you let someone get a grip of you, they are then in a position to tighten that grip, and it will tighten over generations. Why can't we have, as a majority, a little bit more say and freedom? Just a little bit more control over what we do, where we go, and at a price we can all afford. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.